Story. Russian President Vladimir Putin today made an address to the Russian parliament the week that the world marks his decision to invade Ukraine, which happened exactly a year ago. Putin says it was not he who started the war, it was the West. And he says we are ready to withdraw tomorrow, but Ukraine and the West need to stop. It's clear, coming as it does 24 hours after Joe Biden's pit stop in Kyiv, that peace is still very much elusive in the battlefields of Ukraine.
Kyiv stands, and Ukraine stands. Democracy stands. The Americans stand with you, and the world stands with you.
Addressing the Russian parliament just days before the one-year anniversary of the Ukraine war, Putin put the onus of the war on the West. He said the responsibility for fueling the Ukrainian conflict, for its escalation, the number of victims, it all lies completely with the Western elites. He went on to play the victim card, saying that he has done everything possible to solve this issue by peaceful means and negotiating a peaceful way out. But he said that the West is trying to turn a local conflict into a global one, and that Russia will react in an appropriate way because this, according to him, is about the existence of his country. Putin also vowed to systematically press on with Russia's offensive in Ukraine, saying that he will carefully and systematically solve the aims that face his nation. But perhaps the most significant announcement from Putin today was the decision to suspend Moscow's participation in the New START treaty, which is the last remaining nuclear arms control pact between Russia and the United States. Under the New START treaty, United States and Russia had pledged to limit the two sides' strategic nuclear arsenals. Giving reasons for the decision, Putin blamed the United States and its NATO allies of openly declaring the goal of Russia's defeat in Ukraine. He claimed that NATO allies had helped Ukraine mount drone attacks on Russian air bases, which were hosting nuclear-capable strategic missiles. Putin also said that Russia should stand ready to resume nuclear weapons tests if America does so. So this move would end a global ban on nuclear weapons testing that has been in place since the Cold War. The White House has described Putin's accusations against the West as absurdity. Putin's remarks come a day after the US President Joe Biden made a secret trip to Kyiv and promised $500 million in additional fresh arms for the war-torn country. It was Biden's first visit to Ukraine since the war began last year. His 5-hour stopover sent a clear message to Putin of unwavering American support to Ukraine ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion. So how much arms have the West given to Ukraine so far, and in what form? After dragging its feet for months, Germany has decided to send 2 Leopard 2 tanks. They are used by a number of European countries and considered to be easier to maintain and more fuel efficient than some of the other Western tanks. The US is sending about 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, which President Joe Biden describes as the most capable tanks in the world. The Stryker is one of the many armored vehicles that have been donated to Ukraine. The US also recently confirmed that 90 Strykers will be dispatched soon. Among the long-range rocket launchers sent to Ukraine by the United States are the HIMARS. They are believed to have been central to Ukraine's success in pushing Russian forces back in Kherson, particularly in November last year. Australia, Canada, and the United States were among the countries to send the advanced M777 howitzers, as well as other requisite ammunition to Ukraine. NATO countries are also planning to ramp up their supply of shells because Ukraine has been using them at a much faster rate than they are being delivered. Since the start of this conflict, Ukraine has been using the Soviet-era S-300 surface-to-air systems against Russian attacks. Now there are efforts to replenish them with similar systems that are stockpiled in other former Soviet countries like Slovakia. Drones have been featured heavily in this conflict so far, with many used for surveillance, targeting, as well as in heavy lift operations. Turkey has sold the Bayraktar 2 TB2 armed drones to Ukraine in recent months. And Ukraine is not the first time that the West has intervened in another country, the most famous being the war in Afghanistan. In 2001, an international military coalition led by the United States launched an invasion in Afghanistan, toppling the Taliban regime at that time. The conflict ended in 2021 with the return of the Taliban. In 2003, troops from the US, the UK, Australia, and Poland invaded Iraq. Then US President George W. Bush and UK Prime Minister Tony Blair has said that the coalition would disarm Iraq of weapons of mass destruction and end Saddam Hussein's regime. And that's exactly what happened. In 2011, a NATO-led coalition began a military intervention in Libya to implement an immediate ceasefire during the Libyan civil war and the crackdown on the Muammar Gaddafi regime. Gaddafi was killed. In 2017, a military operation led by US and involving UK, France, Canada, and Australia carried out strikes in Syria in support of Syrian rebels and against the Syrian Democratic Forces and the government of Bashar al-Assad. And in the 1960s, of course, the US became involved in Vietnam because it feared the spread of communism. Ultimately, they were unable to defeat the Viet Cong and were met with growing opposition to the war back home. So, many commentators saying that this is no longer just a Russia-Ukraine war. This is the United States versus Russia, Ukraine simply being a proxy. So how do these two militaries compare, the US and Russia? After all, they were stuck with 50 years of Cold War. When it comes to military aircraft, Russia has a little over 4,000 military aircraft. The US has more than 3 times that. Russia has about 1,500 military helicopters. The US has about 5,000 of them. Russia has about 150,000 armored vehicles. The US, again, has more than 3 times what Russia has in terms of armored personal carriers. Also, when it comes to aircraft carriers, Russia has only 1, the United States has 11. Russia has 70 submarines, whereas the United States has slightly less at 68. Russia has 15 destroyers, the US has 92. The Ukraine conflict is the biggest gamble taken by Vladimir Putin so far. In fact, over the last year, Russian forces have suffered 3 major battlefield reversals since this war began, but they still control about a fifth of Ukrainian territory. Tens of thousands of Russian forces have been killed. Putin now says Russia is locked in an existential battle with an arrogant West. The West and Ukraine have rejected his accusations and have joined forces to ensure that Moscow will not win this war. So, what next steps are going to happen in this seemingly unending war? Now, one thing is certain. Russia, at least as of today, is not in a position to outright win this war, as it had originally thought a year or so ago. Russia wanted to quickly capture Kyiv and occupy eastern parts of Ukraine, displace the Zelensky regime. That has not happened. Russia's military has been dwindling in size and capability, so the chances are an independent and sovereign Ukrainian state will remain. In what form or fashion, we don't know, but it will continue to remain as an independent country. Ukraine's military racked up considerable success towards the end of 2022, and it may possibly build on that with additional counteroffensives. People are talking about a spring offensive. But driving the Russians completely out of Ukraine, particularly from the Donbass, that's going to be a stiff challenge, especially as the Russian army has prepared defensive positions. But when do both sides reach a state of mutual exhaustion that could possibly pave the way for negotiations? So far, neither side is blinking, so this could very well drag on for a number of months before there is a peaceful resolution. That's a wrap. Thanks very much for tuning in to Brass Tacks. Good night.